All right, so now that we're recording, I just want to welcome everyone to this terrific event, our April event for the NGO Committee on the Family New York. Today's event is titled Who's in the Family? Various Compositions and the Challenges They Face. We will have multiple presenters today covering a variety of topics within this larger domain. I want to thank you all for joining us. This is a really special event for those of us on the NGO Committee on the Family, because often our events are from people who have been in the field for decades, and it's really important that we as a community of scholars and policymakers and providers of mental health services and other services to our community recognize the value of new ideas, new considerations, and ways to think about the world's problems and how the family can be involved in addressing those issues. And so what better way than to have this great collaboration of graduate students who will be speaking to us today about how the family can be engaged in facing challenges in the world. So I don't believe I've even introduced myself. I apologize. I'm Dr. Ben Freer, co-chair of the NGO Committee on the Family New York. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freer. So hi, everybody. Welcome to our presentation. We are a group of psychology graduate students who work with the Global Center at Pace University. Presenting today will be myself, Anna Stauber, as well as Marie Salerno, Heaven Allen, Megan Leon, and Natalie Peterson. Very special thank you to our supervisor, Dr. Florence Denmark, and the NGO Family Committee for this awesome opportunity. I'll be introducing the presentation.
I just want to say, I'm interrupting, but only to say this was all done by the students, not I supervised, as was said, but I had no part in arranging it or organizing it. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Denmark. I appreciate it. I'll be introducing our presentation in just a second, but I just wanted to, because someone has to introduce me. I'm Anna Stauber. I'm presenting from my hometown of Minneapolis, where I currently work remotely for the NGO Committee on Aging. I'll be graduating from Pace University next month with a master's degree in global psychology and hope to continue on to a position where I get to work in advocacy for older adults. I'll be leading this presentation and we'll begin by discussing the history and current status of nuclear families. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So who is in the family? Various compositions and the challenges they face. When you think of a family, what comes to mind? Do you think of a mom, a dad, and 2 kids sitting around a dinner table? Who else is there? Are grandma and grandpa there? Are there step-parents or stepchildren there? Is there only one parent? Are they eating chicken nuggets or Middle Eastern tabbouleh? The word family has come to include various definitions and determinants for inclusion and exclusion of members. In our presentation today, we'll take a look at some of the common family structures and how these different compositions benefit the individual as well as the family unit itself. We'll also look at what the global trends are and any challenges that these structures have to overcome in order to strengthen the family members as well as child development. So we're going to start with the nuclear family. Within a nuclear family, there are 2 parental figures, often a legally married mother and a father. The father figure may help with childcare and housekeeping, but their primary role in a nuclear family is to provide financial stability. Inversely, though they may wield a certain amount of power within the home and over the children, the mother figure's primary role is caretaker of the family. In a nuclear family unit, the 2 parents, along with their biological children, are considered a closed system. The nuclear family itself is largely a North American construct, though the idea has absolutely spread beyond those borders, and nowhere has it become as culturally pervasive as it is in the United States. At its core, the nuclear family generally doesn't include extended family members such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, or any other close individuals, related or not. So when did the nuclear family become the ubiquitous image of a stable household life? It's often the culture of the 1950s in the United States that people point to for the answer to this question. In the US, The 50s was an era defined by its high birth rates, high marriage rates, low divorce rates, and general family togetherness. The culture of the 1950s highly valued biological children and saw a rise in the culture of childhood as the middle class and the suburbs both grew. The term nuclear family largely grew out of the culture of the 50s and the atomic age, which was just post-World War II. Though the word nuclear grew in popularity during this time, it doesn't refer to nuclear reactions here. Instead, it comes from the Latin root nux, meaning nut or the core, the center of something. So here, the family is the nux around which the lives of the rest of the family rotate. Since the 1950s, the US has seen a shift within the structure of family units. In the post-World War II era, rates of divorce began to climb, and fertility rates, which had been on the rise throughout the 50s and 60s, began to revert to the lower levels that were seen during the 30s and the 40s. In 1958, the average American woman would have 3.7 children during her life, and by 1992, that number had decreased to just 2. Researchers point to an increase of women in the workforce for this decline in birth rates. In 1960, a survey showed that 42% of all families had a sole male breadwinner. By 1988, only 15% of households had the same. In 1993, a large survey of Americans found that a staggering 79% of people agreed that it takes 2 paychecks to support a family today. This sentiment is echoed in the numbers. In 1990, 57% of all women in the US, females over the age of 18, participated in the workforce at some point in their lifetimes, whereas in 1960, that number was only 38%. These numbers right here don't indicate how long these women remain in the workforce, but in the next couple of slides, I'll help to paint a fuller picture of this shift. Women entering the workforce had other ramifications in regard to family structures. In the 1960s, the median age of women's first marriage was 20.3 years old, and in 1991, that median age had increased to 24.1 years old. In the 60s, only 17% of unmarried women in their late 20s headed a household, and by 1990, that number had increased substantially to 60%. Of course, we have to take into consideration the definition of heading a household, which here was understood as a period of time where one either lives alone or in a family unit for which they were the main or sole breadwinner. In 1990, though still only about 3% of households were headed by unmarried couples, this was still almost 3 million families in the US, whereas in the 1960s, this number hovered around 400,000. This showed an increase of over 6 times that of the 60s. There have been scholars that have credited the women's movement and the push for egalitarian roles in the household with the reduction of prevalence of the nuclear family. And it's true that in some ways, the restraints that the traditional nuclear family role had on women fueled the women's movement. Though this change dislodged some of the strict roles in the nuclear structure, it's also been found that egalitarian roles in a family are better for all the parental figures as well as the children. In the nuclear family, the fathers were often restricted from the pleasures of childbearing due to their role as the solitary breadwinner of the family and the pressures that came with that. And on the other hand, women were often restricted from finding purpose outside of the home in breadwinning roles. So while the pressures to conform to roles in this way can lead to less fulfillment for the adults in the family, looking at children, we can see that the pressures of a nuclear family can also affect them. This can cause children to be less able to establish their own individual relationships with each parent, as well as explore how they fit into this structure and structures outside the family, including their own needs and desires. The movement away from a traditional nuclear family can be reframed as progress instead of decline, since families are able to forge their own path for what really works for them as a unit, as well as for the individuals inside of them. In fact, many developmental psychologists would agree that families become a stronger institution when there's more equality at the center. This leads to the question, does the nuclear family still exist today? The average American might view the family trends in the US in the last 50 years as a signal of the decline of the nuclear family. And though many people are choosing to marry later or not marry at all, end their marriages and start new ones, and maybe even have few or no children, these demographic changes are becoming more accepted and more understood in many cultures worldwide. In 1981, Levitan and Belos wrote a book called What's Happening to the American Family? In it, they said, the institution itself is undergoing an evolution, not a dissolution. The currently fashionable gloom and doom scenarios in regards to the family miss the essential process of adjustment and change that every culture experiences. Though nuclear families were never a universal human experience, the idea of cooperative child rearing is. Though there's variation due to culture, evolutionary sciences agree that within the human species, parenting is a cooperative behavior. Mothers require help from others to successfully raise their children. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that mothers need a husband. However, humans couple, group, band, or bond with each other as a way to successfully nurture their children. This cooperative child rearing has been seen in different forms throughout human existence. And today, for the rest of this conversation, we're going to discuss some of the variations of this. So up next, we have Marie Salerno presenting on single-parent families. Marie grew up in New York City and is graduating from the Masters of Psychology program at Pace University this May. She'll begin her PhD studies in school psychology at Fordham University in the fall. Today, Marie is going to be talking about single-parent families and the unique qualities that come from that structure, as well as some resources that those families can utilize. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to be speaking about single-parent families. And to start off, we will start with a definition. So single-parent families are categorized as families with children and a parent who is either widowed, divorced, and not remarried, or by a parent who is never married. So there are variations of single-parent families, including an unwed mother, a divorcee, a widow or widower, or a family in which a parent is incarcerated. So now that we've established a definition, I'm going to speak about the history of single-parent families. So historically, the death of a parent was the most typical cause of single-parent families in the past. High parent mortality rates in around the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries were largely due to things like disease, war, and complications from maternal childbirth. Single-parent families that were formed after divorce or separation were very rare in early American centuries. This was mostly due to the legal, social, religious, and political stigma associated with divorce that often frowned on divorce. Single-parent adoptions were rare as well, considering that state officials preferred adoptive parents to be in what they called nuclear families, as Anna just explained to us, and at this time, this referred to a married man and woman. However, women were the favored adopters in the rare case that they were allowed to, because men were considered unfit to parent independently at that time. Additionally, parents were also not likely to stay single for long following the death of a spouse, because at the time, two parents were considered essential to the family's livelihood. Additionally, quick remarriages occurred out of necessity, so single-parent homes were short in duration if they even occurred in the first place. And then, by the 20th century, the demographics and families in the United States had shifted, with the rise in single-parent households, with divorce rates stabilizing in the 1980s, and with the number of children being born to single mothers. And so this leads us to current global trends of single-parent families. So for decades, single-parent households have been rising, accompanied with a decline in marriage rates and a rise in births outside of marriage. Now, a study conducted by the Pew Research Center of 130 countries and territories has shown that the United States has the world's highest rate of children living in single-parent households as of 2019. Furthermore, 80% of single-parent families are headed by single mothers. So there may have been claims in the past that in order to develop well, a child needed both a mother and father in their life. However, this is not true. The most important thing and the most critical thing for a child's development is that they are brought up in a loving and healthy home. However, there are disadvantages to single-parent households that I will address later on in this presentation. So back to the global trends. So 23% of children in the United States under the age of 18 years old live with one parent and no other adults, more than 3 times the share of children around the world who do. Additionally, children in the United States from Christian and religiously unaffiliated families are equally as likely to live in this similar arrangement. So to compare that globally, only 3% of children in China, 4% of children in Nigeria and 5% of children in India live in single-parent households. Now, this has to do with the economy. So economy is a large and very determining and defining factor in household size. So many children in countries that have lower levels of economic development will live in extended families, meaning that they will live with their aunts, their uncles, grandparents, and cousins, and so forth. So 38% of children globally live with their relatives, whereas in the United States, only 8% of children live with their relatives. So there are some challenges that single-parent families faced, as I mentioned before, and I will address that right now. So here are some challenges of single-parent families. So one of the most critical challenges is coping with the loss, either due to the loss of a parent due to death, divorce, incarceration. So coping with that loss is very challenging to deal with emotionally as a single parent, but also there's the factor of helping your own child cope with the loss, which is equally as challenging. Another challenge is assuming any additional roles and responsibilities. There's more pressure on the single parent to provide for their child. There is also the potential need for extra hands, maybe from the child themselves. So children of single parents might have more duties and responsibilities around the home, more than a child who has grown up with two parents. Additionally, a child may be more likely to misbehave with one parent than another in the case of divorce, or just in general with only one parent, causing the single parent to maybe feel like they're the bad guy for disciplining their child. Additionally, there are issues that stem specifically from having an incarcerated parent. So the child may never really get to know their incarcerated parent, either due to the fact that their parent was incarcerated before their birth, or maybe incarcerated during their early years of childhood and has remained there since. Additionally, having an incarcerated parent can also create an unstable environment for children and can affect their development and overall well-being. Furthermore, children with incarcerated parents are more likely than other children to experience adverse childhood experiences, and they're also more likely to have more emotional problems and also low school engagement. That being said, there are ways to overcome these challenges. So something that is crucial in helping single-parent families is to establish a support system. So it's easy for single parents to feel overwhelmed with all the responsibilities and duties that they have to take on. So leaning on friends, other family members, just to have someone to watch your kids or someone to lean on for emotional support as a single parent can really help to lessen their stress and their anxiety. Also, if finances allow for it, hiring a tutor or a babysitter can also help in caring for not only the single parent, but of course the child. Additionally, creating a consistent routine can help the child to feel more secure and also help the parent feel more organized. If the single parent is divorced and the other parent remains in the child's life, and if it is safe to do so, ensuring that the child spends time with their other parent. This is beneficial not only for the child, but the single parent, as they can practice self-care and wind down alone. Also, it's critical to keep communication with the child. Help them to share their feelings and emotions and let them have a safe space to do so. Furthermore, writing letters to the parent that is incarcerated, if it is safe to do so, and if the single parent feels comfortable, is highly encouraged, or even arranging a visit. Of course, this is not always possible or advised due to safety reasons, so please proceed with caution. Finally, providing affection and reassurance to the child who has lost their parent, but also ensuring that as a single parent, they are coping as well, either through family counseling, reaching out for emotional support from friends and family, or just engaging in self-care acts. And finally, these are some resource links. So Single Parent USA offers programs, support groups for single parents, as well as programs for children and youth, such as kids clubs and youth leadership programs. Then Single Parent Advocate offers education, food, finance, career, employment, government, health, and shelter resources. Single Mother Grants offer grants to help with things like rent, utility, childcare, education, medication bills, and more, as well as housing and food assistance for single moms. And finally, Dad's Resource Center offers education, resources, and advocacy for single dads. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marie. All right, so we'll move on now to blended families, which will be presented by Heaven Allen. Heaven is presenting from North Granby, Connecticut, and will be graduating from the Masters of Psychology program at Pace University this May. Heaven today will be talking about blended families, the history of some of the stereotypes and the challenges they face, as well as some potential solutions to those challenges that might strengthen the bond within these blended family structures. Take it away, Heaven.
Thank you, Anna. So today I'm going to be discussing the family structure commonly known as the blended family. To begin, what is a blended family? Historically created through spousal death or separation, blended families are often created by the merging of two families, either through remarriage or cohabitation, that include children from previous relationships. Members typically included in a blended family structure are stepmothers, stepfathers, children, both stepchildren biological, and ex-spouses if they are actively involved in their child's life. Historically, the media and popular children's stories have portrayed stepmothers and fathers as evil representations or replacements of biological family members. By societal standards, these family structures are often seen as inadequate establishments compared to the nuclear family systems that we're more commonly exposed to. However, the trends suggest that the blended family is a more typical family dynamic than is typically described. In a study conducted by the Pew Research Center, about 40% of adults in the United States reported having at least one step family member that was not biologically related to them. As of 2016, the percentage of blended families in Canada was 12.6%, and roughly 11% of families in France were also considered to be blended family structures as well. This leads us to the question, what challenges do blended families face? Societal stereotypes about blended family structures centered around societal myths about step-parents can be harmful and negatively affect family transitions, as they have the power to exacerbate family conflict, primarily when these negative stereotypes affect the child or children's views of their new changing family dynamic. The formation of a new union with children from past relationships brings new responsibilities. The unique challenges of forming a blended family can be exacerbated by unrealistic goals, negative stereotypes about step-parents, and feelings associated with the dissolution of the first family dynamic. Additionally, relationships with former spouses can also harm family cohesion, as fighting with a child's biological parent can cause increased stress on a child, making transition difficult and potentially making them feel that they have to pick sides or experience feelings of rejection if their parental conflict results in the further distancing of one parent. Tension and conflict that arise from inadequate or ambiguous boundaries between step-parent and step-child are also a common challenge that blended families often face. A new step-parent may feel excluded or confused about their new role in their step-child. Mixing up or poor implementation of these roles can be detrimental, as the relationship between step-parent and step-child is a crucial aspect of the blended family, essentially influencing the whole dynamic of the family unit itself. Therapeutic intervention can aid in the implementation of clear role assignment and practical boundaries. It can also increase communication between family members, allowing for a safe, communicative space to express the feelings of each family member might be experiencing. Therapeutic intervention can also benefit in cultivating the valuing of difference in multiplicity. Narrative therapists can help invite the family to see their blended structure as through a different lens, that is, as a normal blended or step family, as opposed to an abnormal nuclear family. Additionally, having clear communication and complete transparency between parents, step-parents, and step-children can ease the transitional period as well, by laying out each member's expectations about their new forming family structure. Mindfulness is defined as the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally through the unfolding of experience. Practicing mindfulness within family communication may relate to relationship quality by bolstering effective communication in dyadic interactions, resulting in broader stress reduction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Heaven. All right, our next section about multicultural families will be presented by Megan. Megan grew up in Michigan and comes from a multicultural family herself. Megan is a first-generation college student and will be graduating this May from the Master's of Psychology program at Pace University. Today, she'll be discussing multicultural families, some of the issues they face in society today, and how governments and communities can work together to help mitigate these issues.
Thank you, Anna. So, what is a multicultural family, and what does it mean to come from a multicultural family? Well, the broad definition of a multicultural family is a group of individuals who possess elements of racial and cultural diversity that are not fully reflected in mainstream culture of the given location. As a review, I just included the definitions of both cultural and acculturation for support and just to keep in mind while going throughout these next few slides. So we know that culture is defined by an organized set of thoughts, beliefs, and norms for interaction and communication, all of which may influence cognitions, behavior, and perceptions. Additionally, acculturation is a process of psychological changes in both values, beliefs, and behaviors when adapting to a new culture. This is very similar to assimilation, which we will discuss a little bit more throughout the next few slides as well. So now we will look at the history and global trends of multicultural families. According to research, 60% of the global population is predicted to be culturally or linguistically diverse by year 2050. This makes sense, right? Because people pack up their lives every day and migrate to different countries for so many different reasons, including job transfers, wanting to provide a better life for your family, and even education. So virtually all countries in the world are culturally plural to some capacity. Until recent years, most states around the world had aspired to be what are known as nation states. So this is when a greater majority of people in a given region share the same culture from language, literature, religion, and so on. And the people in this region are very conscious about this shared culture. Being a nation state is an ideal in which cultural boundaries match up with political boundaries. And it is recognized that there really is nothing natural or organic about these nation states. In most countries that are mononational, this type of national homogeneity had to be actively constructed by the state through a range of nation building policies that unfortunately encouraged the preferred national identity while suppressing any alternative identity. Public policies were used to promote and truly consolidate a common national language, history, mythology, national heroes, symbols, and even national education system. Although there are very few countries or regions that are considered nation states or mononational today, what does still exist are political leaders with known beliefs in which elicit a certain idea that it is okay to not accept different cultures. And this is what creates these challenges for multicultural families all over the world. So what do these challenges look like for multicultural families? For starters, many inequalities can be seen through social justice issues reflected in schools, especially as they relate to racial, cultural, and linguistic minorities. For example, specifically in the United States, immigrant students and students of color are routinely undertaught due to assumptions that they are already behind when they enter school because they are not fully assimilated to the dominant language or culture. In addition, specifically in the United States, again, we see a large proportion of children from multicultural families coming from impoverished families and low social economic statuses. This results in limited material and resources both at home and in school. Research also shows that less qualified teachers are usually placed in these areas of low social economic areas. And something that we know for sure are that children need qualified teachers who care and want to help, because this is critical in the student's achievement and adjustment. So why do we continue to set up these multicultural families and their children for failure? Why time and time again do we see economic class being associated with ethnicity and racial differences? Well, research shows that these divisions may have come up historically throughout specialization by various groups, through immigrant status, or through systematic discrimination and denial of educational resources. So there are plenty of benefits to modifying these policies that have been put in place to make them more inclusive of multicultural families. First, there would be an increase of morale and self-esteem for all groups of people. This would probably be the most favorable outcome due to knowing that one's ethnicity and cultural traditions are being acknowledged and respected rather than oppressed. There would be a sense of collective esteem from communities all over the world, derived from being a citizen of a country which vigorously promotes human rights internationally. And we would also likely see an increase in biculturalism and multiculturalism of individuals. This can be seen through ethnic restaurants, cultural festivals, and even religious events. So what would this multicultural state look like? Well, in order to help multicultural families, not just in the United States, but all over the world, changes must be implemented. So first, a multicultural state would involve the rejection of older ideas that the state is a possession of a single national group. The state must be seen as belonging equally to all citizens. Second, a multicultural state rejects all nation-building policies that assimilate or exclude members of minority or non-dominant groups. Instead, it accepts that individuals should have access to state institutions and act as full and equal citizens without having to hide or deny their ethnocultural identity. Lastly, a multicultural state acknowledges the historic injustices that was done and unfortunately are still being done to minority and non-dominant groups today by older policies of assimilation and exclusion. We know that these are just a few changes that would set up multicultural families for success rather than failure. So this may seem like a lot. So, where can we start? So first, I think it's important to start with implementing more integrative language policies. We need governmental educational policies to benefit all kids in the school systems, not just the ones who are fully assimilated and speak the dominant language. Additionally, it's important to not only read about our relevant research, but to actually learn from it. For example, research documents that there's extensive evidence showing that multicultural families are connected to economic inequality in countries that host these undesirable outcomes, such as decreased longevity, lower educational performance, and increasing crime. It's so important that we set up multicultural families for success. And if we are able to do this, we can better avoid these extremes in both wealth and in poverty. It is also important that we as human beings are all looked at as equals. Multiculturalism promotes the integration of different cultures and the sharing of one's ideas and perspectives. The sharing of these ideas can lead to new innovations for businesses and even for more prosperous working relationships all around the world.
Thank you, Megan. All right, next finally, we're gonna look at multi-generational families with Natalie. Natalie is currently located in Los Angeles, California, and is a graduating master's student in the global track at Pace University. She's planning to work in the advocacy field once she graduates. Today, she'll be talking about what a multicultural family is, the challenges they may face, as well as the positive attributes this style of family living can provide for both adults and children. Take it away, Nat.
Thank you, Anna. So like she said, I will be speaking about multi-generational families and multi-generational homes. So first we'll start with a definition. The various definitions that arise through the research can include many things, but overall it includes a household with 2 or more adult generations. This can include grandparents and grandchildren younger than 25, and at least 2 generations living in the same household. In America, the most common multi-generational household does consist of 2 adult generations, but around the world this can vary. Most older adults in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean live with children or extended family members. So these families can include aunts, uncles, and any other extended relative, but everyone is living under the same roof or on the same property. There are many factors that can lead to multi-generational households. First, we have some financial reasons. These type of homes can enable families to buy bigger houses or better houses that suit their needs. It can also allow younger family members to save for their own house. This can also allow for affordability in other areas of life. So maybe splitting the cost of groceries or splitting the cost of utility bills can be very helpful with more people in the home. There are also some social and cultural reasons for living in a multi-generational home. Families can help with providing childcare for children or the support of older family members. And families in general might just enjoy living together if they really enjoy each other's company. There are some cultural reasons that can also be influential here. For example, in Asian cultures, living in a multi-generational home might be rooted in the concept of filial piety. There are lastly some sudden reasons that can lead to multi-generational households, such as unexpected life changes, maybe death of a relative, illness, or divorce later in life. There's one specific phenomenon called skip generation households. This often occurs in countries where migrants leave children behind or where there are high adult mortality rates related to AIDS, civil conflict, or war. And in these circumstances, children are most often left in the care of grandparents, hence the term skip generation households. So we'll start next with some benefits of multi-generational housing. There are plenty. There are some theoretical perspectives that encompass the benefits here. Many of the psychologists in the room may be familiar. First is exchange theory, which suggests that the interactions between family members are similar to transactional exchanges of goods and services. Parents in these homes and with their children will often negotiate for their own needs by offering services to other parties within the family. So regardless of the relative, both parties involved are rewarded, and this has nothing to do with the amount of resources available. They still feel fulfilled in that they've often given something back to their family member as well. Other benefits may include economic benefits, where grandparents and older family members can provide childcare and younger adults can care for their elderly relatives. This can save the cost of paying someone to do this care. Travel costs are also reduced with all the family under one roof. There's no need for gas money or flight expenses with everyone so nearby. We also have social enrichment. A lot of the research shows that exposure to socially enriched family environments does appear to enrich cognitive development and can enhance development of brain structure in children, much of the research citing higher academic performance in children coming from these type of homes. Caring for children also has benefits for grandparents, as many report a lower subjective age, so they feel younger by taking care of the grandchildren. Another theoretical perspective here is altruism, where caring for one another within the family invokes feelings of altruism, which has been linked to improved mood and well-being for everyone. Next, we'll get into some of the challenges that these type of family structures may face. There are issues that can arise surrounding privacy or an imbalance of housework, and there are other challenges that arise when grandparents and parenting styles do not align. So if one caretaker is very strict and another is very permissive, children can get mixed messaging about discipline or what is permissible behavior. There are specific challenges that arise in skip generation households when caring for grandchildren can negatively affect a grandparent's health and their well-being, as well as their social relationships. These type of grandparents are more likely to experience economic hardship than those who do not live with their grandchildren. There are also some issues with legal custody with schools, hospitals, and mental health providers. In circumstances where children do need a legal guardian, if the caretaker is someone other than the parent, they may face issues in these circumstances. So for some of the more surface level problems, there are easy ways to enhance this environment. Much of the research shows that the positivity of the experience of living in this home was dependent on two factors. First, the feeling of individual choice over the arrangement, and second, the level of individual freedom and privacy that the household and property afford. So there are pretty simple solutions here, which can include clear and open communication across the family, setting healthy boundaries with what everyone is okay with. And even more logistically, having separate entrances to a house, separate kitchens for cooking so that it doesn't get too crammed, as well as granny flats, which are where it's all on the same property, but a grandmother or extended family member might live in a different household. Other research indicates that support groups for grandparents caring for grandchildren can also be very helpful in maintaining social support, and fostering consistent parenting styles across all caretaking groups can lead to more consistent messaging for children. In the future, there is only likely to be an increasing number of multi-generational households due to a number of factors. This includes the increased longevity in the population aging, as well as delays in younger people forming independent households. We'll get into some of the solution routes lastly. There is nothing inherently wrong with the multi-generational family. As you heard, there are actually overwhelmingly benefits to this type of family structure. But for the challenges that do arise, or in situations where family members are trying to reach independent households, there are various solution routes which can help. First is more availability of support groups. These are great for the mental health and social support, especially in those skip generation homes where grandparents are caring for grandchildren. We also need some policy shifts relating to guardianship, where family members can get legal custody of children to ensure that these children are getting the adequate medical, mental, and healthcare, as well as school enrollment and other activities needing a legal guardian. Another solution that can help here is affordable housing and affordable education. This could really help younger adults that are trying to form independent households, since the increasing cost of housing and education can produce some financial strain and burden on these young adults, I should say, and help promote independent housing for these younger generations. It would also be helpful to have paid family leave and flexible work environments, which can allow parents to afford childcare outside the family if needed, or if family members need a break to care for themselves, the parents can either afford to hire someone for this care or take time off work to care for the children themselves. Lastly, better policy considerations for these type of family structures may be very beneficial. Policies do not always consider multi-generational families as the typical structure, but incorporating this family structure, as well as all of the others that my fellow presenters talked about today, can create a more inclusive and expansive legal framework for these families and serve as a protective factor, in their well-being.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you again to all of my classmates. To sum everything up, first we discussed nuclear families from the 1950s and how important cooperative child rearing is. From there, we discussed single parent families, barriers to success, and resources available for those families. Then we looked at blended families, when two families merge to create a unique unit with difficulties and strengths, and multicultural families with either assimilation and exclusion, and how those changes can affect the dynamics of that family. And finally, multi-generational households, where shared child rearing, shared finances, and shared spaces can lead to stronger families. We as humans are resilient. We now have a global culture that continues to grow, shift, and change. As the world around us changes, so too does who we lean on when things are tough. And as you've seen here, there isn't one right way to have a family. A family is what you make of it. The most important aspect of a family is that it nurtures and supports every member. Thank you for listening to our presentation today, and thank you again to the Family Committee, Ryan Coe, who wasn't here, and Dr. Ben Freer, as well as the executive committee there, and to Florence Denmark, who helped get us this opportunity. I guess we can open the floor to questions.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Anna, and everyone presenting. This was really a wonderful event, and will continue to be because we can now have nice conversation. And I, as is often the case, will take, I'm not the moderator today, I suppose, but my own privilege in asking our first question while others are considering. And one that I imagine is on a lot of our minds is, for each of you, we're talking about kind of different types of families and the challenges that are experienced and can be overcome and addressed. And I'm curious how the current COVID pandemic has impacted the kind of family structure that you were presenting on, and whether, kind of to take the positive slant on this, which I feel like is helpful at any time we can, what are some outcomes from the COVID pandemic that have demonstrated the value of the family, or ways the family can be malleable and adjust to something that in this case was a horrific environmental, biological issue. So I think each of the presenters maybe be able to speak on that aspect would be really wonderful.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off with that. Just because, as Anna mentioned when she introduced me, I come from a multicultural family as well. So I can speak on behalf of, what I found through the research and then what I've also experienced. And, it was hard because, as my family always goes back and forth to go and see our relatives. And like my father's country, we weren't able to do that, and we won't be able to do that for a while. And so in that aspect, it's really difficult. And you can probably assume that, families who move and they live far away from their roots and their family, they were not able to do that. And we really aren't sure when we will be able to do that, with the borders of certain countries still being closed and it being difficult and it just being a scary thing to do right now, to travel in general. However, so I can also, there were positives as well, in the sense that, you know, I live in New York now and my family's in Michigan, and coming from a multicultural family, and, you know, with my background specifically, I have a very close-knit family. So it's difficult for me to be away often. And so it was nice because I was able to, you know, kind of pack up and drive home and be with my family. And we all really were able to lean on each other, in the sense that we were able to kind of be in the same household. And I know that is probably, you know, one of the cons of COVID for some people, that it was hard that you were kind of just stuck in the same area as a family. But you know, I think when you come from maybe a more ethnic background and you have those roots, and like, I feel like the, you know, the family and the culture, and within the culture, you're raised to be very tight knit with your family. So that was definitely more of a pro, I think, for in general, for maybe multicultural families, definitely on my behalf. But I would definitely say the biggest obstacle during COVID that will continue to be an obstacle is the traveling part, because, you know, as things open in the States where you can travel, you know, state to state now, it's not up to anyone here or anywhere else where, when you can like cross the border. So that's definitely my take. And, you know, the research that I was able to find, there is obviously not an insane amount of research yet, considering COVID is very new, but what I was able to find, that was definitely coincided with the research as well, and my personal experience.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. I can talk a little bit on the nuclear family dynamics there as well. I know that through the coronavirus, there's been a lot of shifting of what inside of a household looks like for people. It's no longer just their place to go and rewind at the end of the day. It's also now where they work and where they live and where they educate their children. And this has changed the dynamic of the nuclear family. So the parents, I mean, we know that unfortunately divorce rates and domestic violence rates have been increasing through this time. I think we're gonna continue to see some of that as a pattern. We're also seeing more, you know, more COVID babies, which is kind of exciting and can really be a boon to people who were excited about that more intimacy they get to have with each other, and the time that they get to spend with their kid in the home while they're still working from home. So that's kind of a positive spin. We can also talk about like working from home, they get to know their children in a lot more real hands-on ways, growing closer and sort of returning to some of that general family togetherness that really pervaded the culture in the 50s, when the nuclear family was sort of this like iconic ideal. So there are obviously positives to being together more, as much as there are negatives. You just kind of have to search for them right now because it's still very scary out there. So you have to lean on the people that are within your house a lot more. Natalie, did you have anything you wanted to say about how multi-generational families are dealing with this?
Absolutely. I think, of course, it's beneficial that the households of multi-generational families are often larger, so you might not feel as closed in with such a large family around you. But unfortunately, there was a lot of increased cases of COVID with multi-generational households. There's just more people coming in and out of the house, especially with younger people having jobs and then living with maybe their grandparents. This is very dangerous. They could be bringing COVID in unintentionally. And like we saw, much of the death rates of COVID were with older adults or people with pre-existing conditions. So unfortunately, multi-generational homes may have had quite a downside during COVID, but I do think, like Ben mentioned with resilience, that it really can help to have such a great family that is close-knit, and especially with more family members, you might feel less restricted in your interactions.
Thank
Also,
you, Natalie.
if we think about single parent households and how a lot of the things that I were talking about to overcome challenges that they have in their households is planning visits. So if you have an incarcerated parent, unfortunately, that might not be possible at the moment. Perhaps the restrictions have been lifted a bit, but definitely at the beginning of the whole pandemic, there were a lot of restrictions on that. So it might have been hard for children to be able to go see their incarcerated parent. Also, just even divorced parents, depending on where the other parent lives, especially if they were a flight away, maybe they were in a different country, it was definitely a lot more difficult to go and see them. Also, just the fact that being a single parent during this time and having children that are doing their school from home, and like you also have to convert to, you know, maybe you're working at home and you need to find time to split between doing your work and taking care of the household chores and making sure your children are involved in their school programs. So there was definitely a lot of extra stress added on, and also what Anna mentioned about the divorce rates rising, unfortunately. But with that being said, I'm hoping that now we see a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, as we're making progress with, restrictions being lifted and the vaccine. And so I'm hoping that this is a step in the right direction. So.
Sure. So for blended families, the other presenters mentioned the concern of travel. So again, for children specifically, not being able to visit one of their parents can be very stressful for them, and adding to the stress of whatever family transition they're going through. So the importance of finding safe ways for a child to be able to interact with both of their parents is very important. Divorce rates rising may lead to the growth in blended families down the line. Additionally, families going through transition during this time may be experiencing additional stress due to the pandemic. So practicing of clear communication and assigning roles and potentially seeking out therapeutic intervention may be helpful to this family transition if conflict is prevalent.
Thank you. Yes. I got another question for me. Have you encountered any misunderstandings due to differing definitions of the nuclear family? In my experience, a lot of the people concerned about the decline in nuclear families, a family where both parents are present with their kids and are married, aren't talking about the male dominant structure of the family or the gender specific roles that you mentioned today. Is there a need to better define terms in this debate for our society? Absolutely. I think that there is actually probably some negative connotations to the term nuclear families right now in the way that you were saying. There are some really strong gender stereotypes that go along with this term. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to use it though. And colloquially, people are using it more to define just a family unit that lives by itself under one roof. And that is definitely a shortcoming of this particular branch of research right now. So, maybe developmental psychologists, family and marriage psychologists should be getting out there and trying to define or redefine how exactly they want that term to be utilized by the larger population. Right now, it kind of has two meanings, like you said. It both means what I discussed about the 1950s culture with these very demarcated roles and responsibilities of the different parents, but it could mean something a lot more inclusive. It just would take a little bit of kind of digging under the surface to understand what somebody's talking about when they're talking about a nuclear family. Renata, I see that you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentations. I always admire the students, doing such a great job throughout the years. I always attend these very special meetings where the students present. So thank you all. I was especially captivated by the presentation about multicultural families. So maybe this question will be in Omega.
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically, you were mostly talking about the U.S. I suppose, or have more experience in the U.S. and which I think is probably the best example where the multicultural families exist. And I am not very much aware about the research in general on this type of families. I was just wondering if you found any satisfying research at the international level. So that's one question. And the other question is, how do you see the success or I don't know how to define it, of multicultural families in the US itself, because this topic of multiculturalism it was kind of very popular, at least in Europe, a while ago. I remember drafting a report on social integration, and I wanted to tackle this topic of multiculturalism. And then I found a lot of kind of controversial research on it, or lack of consensus, and some countries retreating from this notion of trying to kind of enhance, encourage, or impose multiculturalism, for example, in Germany. So that was a while ago, but I was just wondering if you see any positive changes in this field, and if you could quote any research that's kind of deep and conclusive. Yeah, because it's quite a new topic, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of research out there about multiculturalism and multicultural families, and there's a lot out there based off of the United States, just because I think United States is considered a melting pot where people try and migrate to the United States for better education, for a better life, better jobs, more opportunities. That's kind of the stigma with it. But I did see a decent amount of research on multiculturalism within the Asian families, but more so about how the culture surrounding raising your children and the importance of education and the importance of learning language and how children in Asian cultures are really focused on school way more so than the children in America. That's from the research that I've seen, where it's really focusing, kids go to school 6 days a week. And then I saw how that affects the family and the children when they're so focused on education. However, I did find, we're living in weird times right now, especially in the States, in the sense of multiculturalism, right? So we see a lot of things going on, especially in this past year, about people attacking the Asian community. And even I found some research that was done in France, in Paris, about Muslims and how there was the ban on Muslims. And so it's interesting because, there's one side of it, I think, where, speaking in terms of, let's just say the United States at the moment, where there are opportunities here. You take my dad, who came here from the Middle East and didn't speak any English, didn't have education, didn't have anyone here, and was able to build a life for himself. Sure. However, it's really difficult because I think all over the world, there is this stigma where what you're used to and what you're used to seeing in your surroundings is what's the norm, right? So if someone comes in and you have a different ethnicity, a different culture coming in, people are really threatened by that. And I think that's the main issue. And so there are positives, right? Because we do see a lot of recent research, showed how restaurants in particular have been such a good thing for cultural exposure, right? People love going to a Middle Eastern restaurant or to a Chinese restaurant, whatnot, but it's still the integration of people into communities rather so than just maybe their cultural foods that we're seeing. So yeah, I mean, it's such a dense topic, and there was so much research to kind of sort through. However, I feel as human beings, we can be doing a better job of kind of embracing people, because every time I turn on the news, I'm seeing something about how people are being attacked based on what they look like, what language they're speaking, what their race is. And for me, it kind of hits home because I've been in the situation before where I've had racial slurs against me growing up, and I speak perfect, I don't have an accent. I speak perfect English. I'm born and raised here, right? So I think we're getting somewhere, and I think, maybe we're moving along, but I think there needs to be more in-depth research maybe about how these policies were when these policies were originated, decades ago, and how they're still rooted in people today. So, and I'm sorry if you had a few questions. So if there was anything I didn't answer, please repeat, and I would be happy to answer anything else.
I see that Dr. Congress has put her book on multicultural perspectives into the link, or into the chat box. So if anybody wanted to check that out, I'm sure she encourages you to do so. very knowledgeable on that subject.
And
Are there any?
Oh, sorry. So some people are sending me private questions, so I'll pose those questions as well. So one of our members on the executive council for the NGO Committee on the Family had asked how to engage and encourage healthy father involvement in the family. And this is another one that I think is relevant for all of the presenters, right? I mean, I think one of the errors that we often make, especially in single parent households, is to think that that means that the father cannot or should not be involved. But in all of these contexts of our presenters, there is the role or can be the role of the father within this dynamic. So I think it would be wonderful to hear how that might vary depending on the structure of family that you all were discussing.
Not to put her on the spot, but I think Marie, as our single parent family representative here, is going to give us a little bit of information on that. Is that okay, Marie?
Oh, yeah, of course, of course. So as I said before, 80% of single parent households are headed by a mother. And so I think it's important to consider the fact that if the father is involved in the child's life, if it is safe to do so, this is, I think, very, very critical, is if it's safe to do so, it's very important to encourage the father to be involved in the child's life. If it's possible to do so, if they're in a close proximity, a close range, and of course with COVID, this might depend on the situation, but encouraging the child to have time spent with their father, arrange for visits, arrange for weekend visits if possible, encourage if the child is involved in maybe sports or a program, some sort of after school activity, encouraging that the father be present there and to be able to support their child, because it benefits the child. It's going to make them feel great. It's going to make them feel like, you know, oh, I'm making my father proud. I'm making my parents proud. And it can be very hard to deal with that, especially if maybe there was a divorce involved and things didn't end on a great note. But if the child and the father want to be involved in each other's lives, it's important that as a single parent, you're encouraging that the father is involved and is supporting the child and that they're spending time together. I think that's such a critical component in maintaining and establishing healthy relationships between the child and both of their parents, even if they're not living together under the same household.
That's a really good point. As far as nuclear families go, or as we've kind of determined that we're not going to call them just nuclear families, we're going to clarify that we're talking about families, individual families that live alone within their own space. I think that you can see the family roles kind of shifting for these people. I think that people, men and women, adults alike, are finding that there's more permission within society to find the role within your spousal agreement that works for you best. I'm thinking that people who, want to work outside of the house are feeling more empowered to do that, whether or not they're male or female. And I think that that's helping the children have the appropriate person around them when they need them. I think a lot of places, obviously, there's still policy work that needs to be done to encourage children to be at the forefront of everybody's lives, including in the work hemisphere of their lives. But I think that maternal and paternal leave is more common these days. And a lot of corporations, now that they're working from home, are understanding more and more how important these relationships really are to people's sanities, well-being, health. So hopefully as things start to return to a little bit more sense of normalcy, hopefully we start to see that some of these changes are implemented into the broader conversation and don't just kind of disappear as we get to reopen. Because I think things have kind of gone, there's obviously some terrible things that have happened in the last year, but I think that maybe if we learn from these lessons, we could be seeing more of these appropriate roles for people who want them. All right, so I have a question here from Dr. Stewin, Cynthia Stewin. She wants to know if there's any research any information specifically on grandparents raising grandchildren. Natalie, you kind of covered this.
Yeah, definitely. There is a lot of research. It's the phrase kind of used for this type of household is a skip generation household. And it can be very beneficial for grandchildren to be raised by their grandparents. There's a lot of social enrichment that happens there. And it's also very beneficial for grandparents. They show a lower subjective age, they feel younger, which is obviously great for caring for young children. There are some stressors that specifically arise in these situations. It can kind of take away from maybe the life course that the grandparent was expecting, so they can have less social support in these roles and less connections. Grandparents are often retired. They don't have the work connections that a working parent may have, or just a younger parent in general. But there are resources, support groups have shown to be helpful in this. And if you'd like further information, I would be happy to share some of the articles that I reference for this.
Thank you so much for asking that question, Dr. Stewin. It's obviously very important that we consider the effects not only on the children, but also on the grandparents. And as Natalie said in her presentation, there are both pros and cons to grandparents raising children. And as long as the lines of communication are open between all those family members, I think it can be very beneficial for everybody. Does anyone else have any questions for us today? We have a little more time.
I always can ask more questions. There's nothing more that I enjoy than asking questions. So I'm curious, in the context of kind of our more international audience for the NGO Committee on the Family, and in connection with the United Nations, what kind of obstacles and opportunities that you see for families outside of the United States of things that can be applied to in a more global context. Any thoughts that you all had on that aspect of families?
Yeah, I can speak on that just from a general perspective over all of our presentations, since they are very research-based in what we looked up. Unfortunately, if there are any psychologists in the room, you'll resonate with this, that so much of psychological research is very Western, very Eurocentric. It's very easy for it to be conducted in the States, often with like college populations and such. So unfortunately, there is like a limited lens, which might be why it seemed that we did present very US focused. We tried to find as much global research as we could. But I think an overarching theme, I think Anna might have said this like 6 times already, but that any family structure that is supportive, not only of the children, but every member of the family, if they're supported, they feel nourished, they have a welcoming environment, that is ultimately the most essential. And these families, of course, can be found everywhere in the world.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, first, it was a great presentation. I thought it was really interesting, and everyone there did a great job and really looked up in terms of research. But I also wanted to discuss, the issue about making it more international. Yes, we are very U.S. focused and very Western focused, maybe, in the way we define like different kinds of families. But I think it's really important, if you're working with other cultures and other countries, to really understand more about the types of families that they have, and what are the most favorite family structures there, and how do they all work. And as you said, the most important thing is to just have a supportive family environment, and it's not like one system is the best system or the only system. I think a lot of children can be successfully raised in many different types of families, and have been, in single families, multicultural families, all different kinds of families. So.
Absolutely. One of the most interesting pieces of information that I came across that I hadn't in the past was on this cooperative child rearing, which is something that, intuitively makes sense. But I hadn't really considered it as sort of just a generalized term like that before, where that kind of sort of puts into perspective what the goal is of the bonds that we're forming. So as opposed to it being about the structure around the children, it's more about the child, and it's more about making sure that the families are kind of focused on the appropriate part of the family, the part that they're working, to shape and change and create and give the best opportunities to. So I sort of liked that phrase a lot. And I think, that would be another part of research that I'd like to get more into just generally, is more on this cooperative child rearing, discovering all these different bonds and how they can all promote like positive child rearing experiences.
And can I don't know if someone else wants to say something, but anyway, Anne, I just had a response to this. Yes, we really focus on the family, and the family certainly is the main way that we raise children. But I just had a thought about, it's kind of a cliche now, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that, speaks to, a society or a community in which everyone's really involved in raising a child. We give families have a lot of power, in kind of Western society. We give them a power. We only know when there are abuses and it comes to the attention of, like in New York City, ACS or some. But in general, families have a lot of power. But in other societies, I think everyone participates. The family doesn't just belong to biological parents and an extended relatives. It belongs to a lot of people who may not be blood related. And so I just think as we work with other cultures, it's interesting and important maybe to think about other models that are used and that they can be very effective in terms of raising children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that even in, say, blended families, there's consideration for people who did not start in that structure, who have now been kind of brought into that family unit that can just be a little bit confusing, I think. But it, with the effort and working together and again, communicating seems like a big part of it. We still have a couple more minutes. If Ben, anyone else has asked you anything privately, otherwise we can sort of wrap things up if you'd like.
Well, I wanted to leave a few extra minutes because I had asked Renata in the chat if she would be open to just giving us a brief update on the upcoming International Day of the Family event. So I think it would be great if we could do like a 5-minute kind of wrap up if you all have it. If not, that's fine too. So if you want to wrap up, that would be fine. Or if
we have one more question that just came in, so maybe we'll go through that as we kind of wrap things up, and then we'll let Renata give her statement on the family thing that's coming up. So Marcia Barlow asks, stability is such a crucial component of child development. Can you speak to which form of family provides the most stability? I can start, I guess. This is kind of a difficult question because, as we've said kind of over and over and over again, we're starting to feel a little broken. It's kind of what works best for the family. So stability can kind of come in a lot of different forms. I know the nuclear family has been traditionally heralded as like a very stable form of family functioning. However, if that family unit gets broken up in any way, it's a lot more difficult to know who to turn to. Whereas if you look to an intergenerational household, there may be more stability there simply because there's going to be more consistency about there's always going to be someone around. Maybe Natalie can speak to that, and maybe then we can also jump to Megan and Heaven for a quick touch on that subject.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think that it would show that multi-generational homes do provide a lot of stability just because there's a large environment there. I think it's also important to note that all of the family structures that we discussed today are not like completely distinct from one another. One family can enter into almost all of these ranges at one point in their life. So stability is something I think it's great for children, of course, but I think that there's also a lot to be said for adaptability, and that children can adapt, they are resilient. So if they do switch from one family structure to another, they often will be okay as long as they do have the support necessary for it. And as Dr. Congress brought up, there are so many other influences that are also helping children remain stable.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, because I think both Anna and Natalie did a pretty good job of answering that, but I don't really think that there is a correct answer to that, because I think it's different, for every family and what works for each family, right? So I think, as long as you have, Like children need to feel like they are being supported and loved by some sort of parental figure, right? It doesn't, maybe it's not their biological mother or father, maybe it's a grandparent, or maybe it's a distant like family member, whatever it is. But I feel like support can come in so many different forms in so many different ways. And as long as there's the support of, a guardian, I guess is a better way of putting it, then there's room for a child to grow and be prosperous and, be the best person that they can be. It's not necessarily just coming from, having a mom and dad living under the same roof, right? Because we know that that's not always the most stable household. We know that sometimes like it's almost better if the parents go their separate ways, and that can sometimes create more stability for a child. Even though they don't have both parents underneath the household, it could become a much healthier environment. So I definitely think it's very dependent on the kind of family, and just the fact that there is someone there in their life who is like a guardian that is there to support them and love them and, be caring and be there for them.
And well, finally, Heaven, did you want to say anything?
In terms of blended families, just to go off of what my fellow presenters said, any family structure has the potential to be unhealthy or unstable, but again, with healthy communication and a supportive environment, any family structure has the potential to be very, stable and supportive, and a great place for, a family to truly grow and blossom. So.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great question to wrap it up. Thank you, Marcia. So Ben, you can take it away. I guess we're done for the day. Thank you everybody for participating in the questions and answers. We really appreciate it. It gave us a lot of awesome opportunities to talk to you all.
Great. So I once again just say how great the event was and how wonderful it was to hear such a wide array of different types of family structures. And I think, so obvious in so much of what we do with families is that communication, honesty, trust, and safety are paramount in all family structures. And those are the things that all policymakers, intervention individuals, educators, researchers can really agree and understand and support and foster. So once again, just such a wonderful event. And now I want to turn it over to our wonderful partner, Renata Kazmarska, who is, of course, organizing the International Day of the Family at the United Nations this coming May. So I was just hopeful Renata could just provide our membership with some updates on the wonderful event that's coming up.
Sure, thank you, Ben. And this year's International Day of Families that we'll be observing on 14th of May, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. New York time, we'll be focusing on families and new technologies. So this gives us an opportunity to actually launch a major background paper that we are finalizing. So our keynote speaker and the author of the paper, Susan Walker, will be talking about the technology use and parenting education. So I think it will be very interesting, definitely for parents, and also I think for students, since it will also tackle other topics relating to technology. So our speakers will be an academic that actually Ben suggested, Dr. Mary Dozier. So she will be talking about a good practice in technology application for telehealth. We will have a speaker from Common Sense Media. That's one of my favorite organizations that help parents with the media content and as they apply to their age-appropriate, children decisions about what they're supposed to watch. I think it's a very useful, organization. And we'll also hear from special focal group that was created by IFSD actually to discuss the topics about families and new technology. So we'll hear from Jessica Navarro from the University of North Carolina about this and what the group came up with, suggestions and conclusions on the meetings that they had. And I hope to have the final program by tomorrow on our website. So far, you can find the background paper, so a little more about what we want to discuss. And I just hope that the resources that we offer will be useful for whoever participates. And I hope we will have also engaging discussions and questions from you. So we encourage your participation. It will be held on Zoom and also on Facebook Live. And I will be sending a flyer later on and inviting everybody. So thank you, Ben, for this opportunity to introduce the event.
Great. Thank you so much, Renata. And I've put the link to the event in the chat for those who are interested. And of course, we will do everything in our power as the NGO Committee on the Family to share the information that Renata shares with us and with everyone so that anyone can attend the event. For anyone who's attended IDF events in the past, they are always wonderful and from my perspective, always a perfect combination of a celebration of the importance of the family and the power that a family has throughout the world, while also identifying obstacles and challenges that are being faced by families. It's something that I think is a really powerful event, and I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at that event, and certainly all of our future events as well. So with that, we will wrap up today's event. Thank you again so much for the presentations, wonderful and really thought-provoking on how we all can engage with families and assist and foster families throughout the world. Thank you all of our attendees for being here with us and the wonderful questions. For those of you who have interest and are not yet members, you can check our NGO Committee on the Family New York webpage for membership opportunities and also updates on all of our past events and future upcoming events as well. So thank you again so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much.